I am 77 years old. I was married for 55 years to a man who did not love me. At this age, people assume you have made peace with your life. They picture you as someone softened by time, handing out gentle wisdom, as if every mistake has been neatly folded into a lesson. The truth is less poetic. Sometimes you reach 77, not because you were brave, but because you were careful, because you endured, because you learned how to survive inside circumstances that slowly erased you. I don't say that dramatically. I say it the way you state a diagnosis after the test results come back. Calm, measured, final. From the outside, our life looked stable. 40 years at the same Methodist church. Potlucks, Thanksgiving dinners with polished silverware. Christmas cards with smiling children in matching sweaters. People called us solid, dependable, an example. But solidity can be a performance. I cannot remember the last time he reached for my hand in public. I used to notice small gestures other husbands made without thinking. Fingers resting on a wife's back as they crossed a street. A quiet squeeze of reassurance during a long sermon. Mine kept his hands in his pockets. At restaurants, he studied the menu as if it required deep analysis. I would begin telling him about my day, and somewhere between the bread basket and the main course, my words would dissolve into silence. He never interrupted. He just stopped listening. At night, I would turn off the lamp and sit at the edge of the bed a few seconds longer than necessary. The hallway light would stretch in a thin gold line across the carpet. I would wait for the mattress to shift, for his body to turn toward mine. Most nights he turned away. There is a loneliness that happens inches from another human being. It is not dramatic. It does not leave bruises. It simply hollows you out slowly, like water carving stone. Eventually, I stopped expecting warmth, and when you stop expecting something, you stop noticing its absence. That is how disappearing begins. When I was 15, my parents threw me out of the house. It sounds shocking when I say it plainly, but at the time it felt almost procedural. I had slept with my boyfriend once. I wasn't pregnant. I wasn't defiant. I was just young and wanted to feel wanted. To them, I had shamed the family. They pulled me out of school, locked me in my bedroom. My mother slid plates of food through the doorway without meeting my eyes. I remember staring at the wallpaper for hours, feeling like I had been downgraded from daughter to liability. Then, one Tuesday morning, my mother stood in the doorway with a small suitcase. You need to go. No plan, no hug, no call if you need anything. Back then, I was Gloria Mae Jackson, before I learned that love could be revoked. That moment rearranged something inside me. I learned that love could be revoked, that security was conditional, that belonging depended on performance. I left for college at 15. I worked 3 jobs. I built competence like armor. I learned how to pay rent before I learned how to drive. On paper, I was impressive. Inside, I was terrified of being disposable again. So when I met a man who was steady, who had a stable job, a quiet demeanor, predictable habits, my nervous system relaxed for the first time in years. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't stare at me like I was extraordinary. But he was consistent. He showed up. To a girl who had been expelled from her own home, that felt like love. I didn't understand the difference between being chosen and being tolerated. I only understood that he stayed. The beginning of our marriage wasn't bad. That's the confusing part. There were no violent outbursts, no dramatic betrayals at first, just small corrections. He corrected how I folded towels, how much salt I used, how I pronounced certain words. If I told a story at a dinner party and exaggerated slightly for humor, he would interrupt to clarify. People would laugh. I would laugh too. But something inside me tightened. He had a way of looking at me when I was too animated. Not anger, not cruelty, just mild embarrassment. That look trained me. I became hyper-aware of tone, volume, timing. I began editing myself before speaking. I began asking, does this sound foolish, inside my own head before finishing a sentence? I monitored the sound of the front door. If it closed gently, I relaxed. If it shut hard, my stomach clenched instantly. I would scan the kitchen counters, searching for something I had forgotten to do. Living like that doesn't feel dramatic. It feels normal until it becomes your entire personality. The first time I found proof of his infidelity, my hands were shaking so violently I had to grip the counter. A hotel receipt, 2 glasses of wine, a late checkout. When I confronted him, he didn't explode. He didn't deny it outright. He looked tired, almost inconvenienced. You're too sensitive, he said. You always assume the worst. I remember staring at him, then at the receipt, then back at him, feeling something inside me fracture, because the paper was real. The ink was real. But he spoke with such certainty that I began to doubt my own eyesight. That is what prolonged dismissal does. It makes you question your perception. At a company Christmas party, I watched him place his hand on another woman's lower back, the exact gesture he had never offered me. It was casual, intimate, automatic. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My ears rang. For a split second, I imagined walking over and saying something. Instead, I smiled and refilled someone's wine glass. On the drive home, I said nothing, because by then I understood the rule: peace at any cost. I told myself all marriages cool down, that intimacy fades, that loyalty meant endurance. But endurance without reciprocity is not loyalty. It is self-abandonment. 5 years ago, his heart failed before our marriage did. Open heart surgery, then a stroke. Suddenly, the man who had emotionally kept me at arm's length needed help buttoning his shirt. Nurses called me devoted. Friends called me extraordinary. I memorized medication schedules. I slept in vinyl hospital chairs. I held a plastic cup to his lips when his hands shook. Part of me believed this was the turning point, that vulnerability might soften him, that dependency might create gratitude. It didn't. Illness revealed what had always been there. He became colder, more controlling. He locked his office, took phone calls in the garage. One afternoon, while searching for insurance paperwork, I found his updated will, revised 6 months after his stroke. I sat at his desk and read it twice. My name was gone, not reduced, not protected in some complicated trust. Gone. I remember my body reacting before my mind did. My hands went numb. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room felt tilted, as if the floor had shifted slightly under my feet. 55 years erased by a signature. Everything left to a distant cousin and charities I had never heard of. I waited for rage. Instead, I felt something colder, recognition. The document did not shock me. It confirmed what I had been living for decades. I put it back exactly where I found it, walked into the kitchen, turned on the kettle. When it screamed, the sound felt violent in the silence of the house. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think a forbidden thought. He never loved me. He needed me. He used me. But he did not love me. When he died 3 months later, I was not in the room. He had refused visitors that week. The hospital called at 4:03 in the morning. I stood in our bedroom after the funeral, staring at the empty side of the closet. I expected devastation. What I felt was lightness, and that frightened me more than grief would have. The house is quiet now. No scanning footsteps. No rehearsing conversations in my head. No shrinking before speaking. I make my coffee strong. I buy the bread he said was unnecessary. I leave lights on if I want to. But regret is not dramatic. It sits beside me in the evening and whispers, "You knew." And I did. Not at 15, not even at 30. But somewhere between the first humiliation and the 100th dismissal, I knew I was accepting less than I needed. I knew I was performing gratitude for crumbs. I knew I was staying because being alone felt more dangerous than being unloved. That is the most uncomfortable truth. I was not trapped. I was afraid. Afraid that leaving would confirm what my parents implied, that I was too flawed to be chosen freely. So I stayed. Staying looked strong from the outside. Inside, it felt like slowly evaporating. When you tolerate small erasures, you teach people how to erase you completely. When you ignore your own pain long enough, it stops asking for attention. It just settles in your bones. I sometimes imagine the version of me who left at 40 or at 50. What would she have built? Who would she have become? Regret is not loud. It does not scream. It is a steady awareness that courage was available, and I declined it. If you are listening to this and you feel a quiet tightening in your chest, do not dismiss it. Your body recognizes neglect before your mind is ready to name it. Do not wait for a legal document to confirm what you already feel. Do not wait for decades to pass in polite silence. Fear is sharp but brief. Regret is patient. And if you are not careful, it will sit beside you at 77, asking why you chose safety over truth for so long. Make sure, when you look back at your life, you can see yourself in it, not just the outline of who you were trying to keep.